Good morning guys, welcome to my unboxing and review of the high-grade Crucruz Doan's Island Zaku 2 High Mobility Type. This is a 2025 premium Bandai release that I got for $30, which is pretty expensive for a high-grade, but I do expect this to be a pretty nice Zaku kit. This is the first kit kicking off my Zaku Palooza event, where I am taking a look at a number of different high-grade Zakus to expand my horizons, because I don't know how sacrilegious this is, but I'm not the biggest fan of the Zaku 2 design. I've only built 2 kits of Zakus throughout my Gunpla career, and both of those 2 I built very early on into my journey. So I've decided to take a look at some more, now that I can fully appreciate what these models are capable of, just to see if my mind changes on them. So, fun fact, this kit also has, according to the Gunpla wiki, the record for the longest time between prototype reveal and release for a high-grade kit. This kit was revealed in 2022 and only came out in March of 2025 in Japan. In the States, it was supposed to come out in May, but it got delayed to June because of some logistical issue with shipping. So, getting right into it. Beforehand, I did take a look at the promo images for this kit and compared them with the other Gundam The Origin Zaku 2s, because that's what this kit is based on. And for what I could tell, it looked pretty much just like a color swap of the high-grade Zaku 2 High Mobility Type that we already have, I think the Gaia and Ortega Customs, just with a commander antenna instead of the standard Zaku 2 head that those kits have. So I am curious to see if I am wrong and if it's something more than just a color swap, because if it is just a color swap, I can't see why it would take so long for this kit to come out. But anyway, getting right into it, of course, we get some brand new box art of Char Zaku 2 here. This is, of course, based on its appearance in Crucruz Doan's Island, where it only appeared very briefly in Amuro's dream. It never actually showed up in person. So pretty much prime candidate for a premium Bandai release. Of course, in typical premium Bandai fashion, this is going to be in a monochrome magenta, mirroring Char's color scheme. And of course, on the box, there's pretty much no information to be had on the kit itself. So let's get right into it. Inside the box, we get 4 bags of runners, as well as this very typical premium Bandai style manual, all in black and white, very basic, not even any art on the front or anything. So of course we're going to be getting our parts list here. It looks like a pretty nice selection of runners, as well as a set of water slide decals, which always really nice to see in premium Bandai high grades. So of course, getting into the build here, I've never built any of the Gundam The Origin Zakus, because by the time I was interested in them fairly recently, after I built the Gundam FSD and I was looking online for them, most of the Gundam The Origin kits have been sold out because they have not been reprinted in a very long time, except for, of course, the R78-2 Gundam The Origin version and Char Zaku 2, the Red Comet version. So apart from those, most of those kits have not been reprinted, so I was having a lot of trouble finding them, so taking a look at this instead. First, we get into the build here, which looks to be a pretty typical high-grade build, similar to the Gundam FSD that I took a look at a few weeks ago. It looks like there's going to be some parts layering, but nothing too incredible, so it should be able to recreate the details without going full overboard on having internal detail. Of course, having your power piping here, building onto the very distinct high-mobility backpack. Then you get into the head, very similar to the construction of the high-grade Zaku 2 F2 from what I remember. I have built that kit. And then, oddly enough, after you build the head, you build the waist, and then the arms, and then the legs. So a bit of an odd build order, but apart from that, the build seems fairly typical. It looks to be a mostly complete inner frame in the arms, and a pretty much complete inner frame in the legs. Very nice. Also a ton of detail on some of these parts that I'm seeing here, which I do like to see. And of course you get into the other leg, assemble, and then you build the weapons, including the bazooka type A2, which is different from the typical Zaku bazooka that we are used to seeing, showing off how to hold on to it. And of course you get your heat hawk in both a deployed and stored state. And of course you get your anti-ship rifle, very high grade, 2 parts that sandwich together, a part for the barrel and 2 parts for the scope. And of course you get your iconic Zaku machine gun. Very expected stuff. You can mount spare magazines on the back skirt. And then you get your decal guide here and your color guide on the bottom in both Japanese and in English, but no color, of course. So it looks to be a simple but fairly nice high grade build. So getting to the contents of the bags, we get 12 runners, as well as this sheet of water slide decals. Again, love to see this in premium Bandai high grades. Normally you don't see these. You normally get, if you get anything at all, it's just a normal set of sticker style decals. The water slides are normally reserved for master grades or very occasionally real grades. So I really like to see here. What I don't like to see is that the mono eye and the scope for the rifle are also on here. So you're not getting any kind of cool metallic effect. You're just getting the water slide here. Instead of using these, I'm probably just going to paint in those details myself with a metallic Gundam marker. So with no color correcting sticker sheet, getting into the runners themselves. So of course, despite this being part of the Crucruz Doan's Island line, this is going to be heavily based on the Gundam The Origin Zaku 2. So this is, of course, going to be using PC001 for a set of standard 1/44th scale polycaps. Again, Gundam The Origin, this is going to use polycaps. It should be fine. Nothing of this design is crazy enough to I believe, pose any kind of stability or balance issue with the polycap joints, but we'll see after the build. So runner A is going to be a Mega Runner split into 2 halves. Runner A1 here going to be in this muted magenta color. The color scheme on this kit is a little bit odd. Normally, Char Zaku is very kind of salmon and almost pinkish in color. Here, this kit actually seems to be red. I do like this color scheme a lot more than the traditional Char's color scheme, but of course, A1 here going to be entirely in this muted magenta color. It's a little bit redder on camera than it is in person. In person, it's a bit more faded. This is, of course, going to contain parts for both shoulders with the shoulder shield, the spike shoulder here, parts for the head, the backs of the hands, some joint parts, etc. Runner A2 in the very typical Char's color scheme burgundy here that we all know and love for parts for the skirt armor, torso, backpack, etc. In case I forgot to mention earlier, those runners were from 2015 standard Gundam the Origin Zaku 2. We get runner B1 here in this dark gray for parts for things like the knees and the feet. This is also from the high-grade Gundam the Origin Zaku 2. We get runner B3 here from the Zaku 06R. I believe this is from the Gundam the Origin High Mobility Zaku 2. I'll throw up a correction on screen now if I'm wrong, but this is going to be parts for our High Mobility backpack. Runner C in that same faded magenta color of runner A1 is going to be pretty much all of the power piping all over this kit. We get runners D1 and D2 in this very dark gray, still from the Gundam the Origin Zaku 2 from 2015. Going to be a number of joint and frame parts here, D2 being a copy of all of this from D1, D1 just having these extra parts for things like the waist, neck, backpack, etc. Runner E1 still from 2015's Gundam the Origin Zaku 2, going to be a bunch of armor parts here in that faded magenta color here for things like the feet, the thighs, joint caps, the arms, etc. All with a lot of very nice surface detail in very Gundam the Origin fashion. Runner F here, still from 2015's Zaku 2, going to be an accessory runner for building the bazooka type A2 or whatever it was called. Both of our heat hawks here, all of our hand option parts here, the anti-ship rifle, some I don't know if these are spare magazines or the triple leg missile pods that the Zaku 2 is known to use. This is going to be our main accessory runner. Right, runners G1 and G2 come linked here. This is going to be presumably for the Zaku 2 High Mobility type, or the 06R, whatever it's called, from 2015. This is going to be all of our new armor parts for the High Mobility parts in the legs. So we get our upper leg parts over here and our lower leg parts over here. And runner H2, still from 2015, going to be in dark gray, parts for the Zaku machine gun, as well as a ton of thruster parts here. So after looking at all these parts, I'm really questioning why it took so long for this kit to come out, considering it's pretty much just, my suspicions were confirmed, it's pretty much just a recolor of the High Mobility Zaku 2 from 2015 from Gundam the Origin. So I'm pretty much just building that kit, but in Char's color scheme, which I do like a little more than the black Tri-Star's color scheme with a nice set of water slides. So I'll see you after the build. All right, welcome back. Here's the high-grade Crucruz Doan's Island, Zaku 2 High Mobility type. I'll probably just be calling it the Zaku HiMo or the HiMo Zaku or something like that for brevity's sake. Snap-built, panel-lined, and there were plenty of panel lining opportunities on this kit, and decaled up with the included water slide decals and top-coated with Mr. Hobby Premium Flat Top Coat. And before I get into the build, I just want to say that I'm trying something new. I got a suggestion on one of my posts that I should integrate some kind of B-roll for the build, and I did think that was a good idea. So originally I was going to try just traditional B-roll footage, but I found out I am really bad at building stuff when I have to kind of stare at it through a camera and try to make sure everything looks good while I'm building. It just went horribly, so instead I decided to try a time-lapse. You can let me know what you think of it in the comments below, if I should keep it or if I should just get rid of it and just do what I've been doing and just have this spin around while I talk about the build. And when I can figure out a way to get a decent top-down camera for B-roll setup, then I do that instead. But getting into the build, this is going to be pretty much just a color swap of 2015's Gundam the Origin Zaku 2 High Mobility type from the black Tri-Stars. There are a couple of differences in this kit. We'll talk about those in the aesthetics section, but in general the build is quite nice. There's quite a bit of parts layering and things like that. There are a few parts that are just 2 halves sandwiched together. This is still a high grade after all, like the forearms, the shoulders, the big boosters on the legs. 2 parts sandwiched together with some parts layering on top of it, but where there is parts layering, it does work quite nicely. You see it in things like the torso, where things look quite nice. You see it on the larger lower leg units for the high mobility type with all of those thrusters and things like that, with all the power piping. All of that looks really great, and it looks even better once you panel line it. There's a ton of surface detail on this kit. In general, the build is quite nice. The only thing you really need to keep in mind with the build is going to be the power piping in the torso. So I didn't realize this in the manual because, again, I was trying to film B-roll, so I just kind of glossed over it, and I didn't notice until much later. But you're supposed to kind of kink the power piping in the torso. You can see there's all these like little what looks like almost rips or things like that, these little gaps in here where you're supposed to kind of squeeze the power piping to make a more natural looking bend. I forgot to do that until a lot later, so it looks a little bit unnatural on the kit's left side. It looks a bit better on the right, but there is still a bit of a gap there, so just keep that in mind when you build this kit. Kink your power piping properly and remember to do it, otherwise it'll look pretty bad if you forget to until much later like I did. But apart from that, the build is quite pleasant. It is still a high grade after all, so there is plenty of simplicity. There are polycaps in this build, but because this is pretty much a basic Zaku 2 with a couple of additions because of the high mobility configuration, it doesn't really have any balance issues that I've noticed, so this kit is pretty nice overall in terms of the build. In terms of aesthetics then, this kit is, well, it's the Zaku 2 high mobility type. I mentioned earlier that I wasn't the biggest fan of the Zaku 2, that's just the plain old Zaku 2. I do like the high mobility type quite a bit. The beefier lower legs would that actually serve a purpose with all these booster units and stuff really does quite a bit for me. I'm not a big fan of the kind of bulbous normal Zaku 2 legs that don't really do all that much. And I do really like the beefier backpack that the high mobility type has over the normal Zaku 2. So I did mention that this kit has basically 3 visual differences between it and the Black Tri-Stars high mobility type Zaku 2 that came out in 2015 for the Gundam the Origin series, and they are these 3 things. Of course, you have the color palette here being Char's color palette with what is normally supposed to be like a salmony pale pink and a dark burgundy red, as opposed to the Black Tri-Stars color scheme. Here the colors are a bit muted, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Of course, you have the commander antenna here. None of the Black Tri-Stars high mobility Zaku 2s have the commander antenna on them. This kit, of course, being Char's unit, does. And the third difference is in the chest here. You can see these 2 kind of recessed parts here in the tops of the chest units. All the Black Tri-Stars ones do not have that. All of Char's Zaku 2s from the Gundam of the Origin series do have this. I'm pretty sure these are supposed to be chest Vulcans or something. The wiki doesn't exactly mention what they're supposed to be, but given the 3, I don't know how you can see that there's 3 like tiny barrel details on the inside. I'm pretty sure they're chest Vulcans. But yeah, apart from that, aesthetically, it's pretty much just the Zaku 2 that a lot of people know and love. I really like the high mobility parts to it, and I really think they do help balance out the rest of the design, so I like it a lot more than the normal Zaku 2. Of course, as you saw in the unboxing section, there are going to be no foil color correcting stickers on this kit. There are a few color correcting stickers, but they are part of the water slide sheet. Of course, you're going to have one for the mono eye here on the front. You have 2 options for it. I picked the plain kind of pinkish circle. For the mono eye, there's another one that's a smaller pink circle with a black outline. There is a pink circle that's supposed to go in the Zaku bazooka here. I just decided to paint it in with fluorescent pink Gundam marker instead. And then, of course, the scope for the anti-ship rifle here, it has a darker purplish color correcting water slide decal on the sheet. Of course, I decided to use a metallic pink Gundam marker instead for the front and the back of the scope instead. I do think it looks a lot nicer than just plain purple would. On the deployed Heat Hawk, the lore is kind of conflicting for what the color of the blade is supposed to be. In a lot of cases, it'll say, oh no, the blade just doesn't change color, it just gets really hot and nothing really changes when it's activated. Some others show the blade as being in a very bright orange to show that it is activated and being heated up. So I did paint in the edge here a metallic orange to indicate that on the deployed Heat Hawk. And then the one color inaccurate part of this kit that does not get any color correcting things on the water slide decal sheet is going to be the square on the backpack. That is supposed to be in the same kind of, what is normally a light pinkish color, but here it's more like a dull red for the main armor tone of Char's Zaku 2. It's supposed to be the square here. Now I used a red undercoat and Char's pink Gundam markers to kind of fill in this square, but when I top coated it, the color changed a little bit and it's looking a bit orangey now, even though I did not use any orange for the color of this square. So this is a little bit off, but just know that it's supposed to be in the same kind of main shade of red as the Zaku here. So besides that, the only really color inaccurate parts that you need to fill in yourself are going to be filling in the void details of the thrusters here on the feet. In the leg units here, I forgot to, but you can just shade in the center in black. I did do the sub thrusters here all over the enhanced leg units here for the high mobility type, and I filled in the center of the chest Vulcans in black. And besides that, there are just a ton of panel lining details on this kit, particularly in the leg units. You can see all of this super nice surface detail here on the legs. All of that looks really nice with some black panel liner. If you hate panel lining, then I would just avoid Gundam the Origin kits in general. They seem to be a lot heavier on, I guess, more realistic surface detail than a lot of other high grades, which I think looks really cool, but if you think panel lining is tedious, then you're not really going to like it. But panel lining really does help this kit look its best with all of the surface detail all over this kit. And before I move on to accessories really quick, I do just want to point out some of the very prominent seam lines on this kit, because this kit does have a few pretty bad ones. There were 3 really bad ones that I noticed. There's of course going to be one going down the center of each of the forearms here, which is a little bit disappointing because there's a decal that goes right on that seam line. So depending on what happens, this decal might just pop off if the seam line is a little bit jagged. So that is something you definitely will probably want to clean up. It is not present on the back because there's this cap piece that goes over it. In the spike shoulder, there was going to be a seam line running down the center of the shoulder here. Again, another decal goes right on the seam line. And what they decided to do with the seam line was a little bit weird. Instead of running straight down the spike, they decided to stop it almost near the top and then kind of wrap it around the top of the spike here to act almost like a detail line, but not quite, because it only wraps around half of the spike. So as a detail line, it's a little weird, and you're either going to need to clean it up or scribe in the rest of the detail around the top of the spike here. But at that point, this is the only spike that has 3 detail lines instead of 2, so then you would, to have it match the other spikes, you would need to scribe in the detail line for the other spikes too, which is just kind of weird. It's just a bit of an odd choice to make for the seam line in the spike shoulder. And then in the leg units here, the main kind of enhanced lower leg unit for the high mobility type Zaku is going to be 2 halves sandwiched together, so there's going to be this pretty nasty seam line running down the middle of the inside edge. The outside edge is mostly covered up with things like this power piping line coming down here, all of these sub thrusters and details and things breaking it up, but you can still see that seam line behind the power piping here and extending a little bit down below it. So overall, there are some pretty major seam lines here that do need cleaning up, but apart from that, this kit is mostly aesthetically accurate to the high mobility type Zaku 2. So for a quick size comparison, here is the Zaku 2 HiMo type, right next to a standard size Tiger, being the High Grade Blue Destiny Unit 1. So they did do some kind of funkiness with the scaling of this kit, because the Zaku 2 is supposed to be shorter than a Gundam in universe. A typical Gundam stands at 18 meters tall. The Blue Destiny here is also a little shorter than it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be 18.5 meters tall. This stands about in line with a typical Gundam, so it stands like a 18 meter tall kit. The Zaku is supposed to be 17.5 meters tall, and as you can see here, head height, it is actually slightly taller than the Blue Destiny. And I'm pretty sure the high mobility parts aren't supposed to give it like that much extra height, so having it be slightly taller than the Blue Destiny here is a little bit odd, but it's not by much, so just keep in mind this will take up about average space for a typical high grade on your shelf, with a little more volume and depth space needed if you're having it holding something like the anti-ship rifle, which you'll see in a bit. And of course, for a comparison for the color palette, here is the Crucruz Doan's Island Zaku 2 HiMo, right next to the Master Grade Char Zaku 2 2.0. Now, there's plenty of visible dump marks on this kit. This was the second Master Grade I ever built, so just please forgive that. I didn't know how to clean up dump marks back then. But as you can see here, the color palette is markedly different from what we normally know as Char's Zaku. So you can see the burgundy is significantly redder on the high grade version here. The grays are a bit darker, but that might just be the top coat distorting the colors, but the main difference is going to be in the pink that Char Zaku 2 traditionally uses in normal UC. Here it's much redder. It still has a bit of a pinkish tone to it, but it comes off more as a kind of dull red magenta rather than the salmony pink that we know as Char's kind of signature color. So just keep that in mind. It also seems to be a little bit different from the promo images. The promo images for this kit, which I'll throw up on screen right now, have the main shade of armor for this kit being a lot redder than what you see here. It's a lot brighter red. Here, it might be the top coat doling it down a bit, but even in the untop coated state, which you saw in the time-lapse section earlier, it was significantly duller than what you see in the promo images. So I don't know if that's a weird color error or just the lighting that they were using for the promo images, but yeah, this Zaku 2 has a much duller color scheme than Char Zaku 2 normally does, and I do like this quite a bit. For accessories, here is the Zaku 2 HiMo with everything it comes with. As you can see, there's quite a large accessory spread here, so let's get right into it. Starting as usual with our hand options, you're of course going to get the standard high-grade holding hands that you see on the kit right here. Of course, besides those holding hands, you're going to get 2 additional hands. You're going to get this open expressive / rifle support hand for the left side only, and you are going to get this trigger finger hand for the right side only for any of the Zaku 2 HiMo's ranged options. Speaking of which, for our ranged options, you are of course going to get a standard Zaku machine gun here. This is very similar to a lot of other Zaku machine guns we've seen over the years, nothing much to say. You're of course going to get a secondary handle. The scope here can articulate back and forth like so. The magazine is removable, although it is pretty tight on there. And you get 1 spare magazine down here. When not in use, you can display the magazine on the Zaku's side skirts here. You can see there's holes here for mounting either the Heat Hawk or the spare drum magazine for the Zaku machine gun. You can also mount it on the back here, but you can't really do it if it's in the air, because this is of course also the Zaku 2 HiMo's mounting hole for an action base if you have this in the air. You are going to get this Zaku bazooka, which is a bit different from the Zaku bazooka you know if you've built any kind of normal UC Zakus. With this large square magazine here, the magazine is removable, and you will of course get 2 spare magazines here. I originally thought these were going to be like triple missile leg pods that Zaku's normally have that you can mount on the sides, but of course, with this being the HiMo type, this does not have any kind of mounting space for any triple missile pods. So instead, these are going to be spare magazines for the bazooka that you can mount on the shoulder shield with these little slits here, although it will cover up these very nice decals that are on the shoulder shield right now. Now, the manual doesn't say to cut this out, but this is an adapter for the Zaku bazooka. It will just kind of clip onto the Zaku bazooka like so. And of course this peg here will mount into the slot in the back skirt, but of course that will be taken up by an action base adapter if you have this in the air. And finally, you have kind of the main impressive ranged weapon of this kit, the anti-ship rifle here. There's pretty much no articulation to speak of for this weapon. The magazine is not removable. There is no secondary handle or anything. All it does is look nice and impressive. The scope doesn't articulate, but it does look pretty nice, especially if you use metallic paint for the scope like I did. This weapon just looks really fantastic, and you'll see more of it in the posing section. And then for the Zaku 2's main melee options here, you get 2 Heat Hawks, one deployed in this kind of longer state here. Like I said earlier, I did paint in the blade a metallic orange, so it does stand out quite a bit. And a stored version here with a chunkier blade because the blade is kind of retracted and the handle's not extended. You will of course get a peg here to mount onto the side skirts, but apart from that, pretty typical Heat Hawks that you would see in any other Zaku kit. So of course the Char's HiMo Zaku here is going to have pretty much every accessory you would expect it to. The only thing really missing are some extra hand options, but it's a high grade. That's kind of to be expected that a few are going to be missing. So getting into articulation now, of course being a Zaku head in terms of an upward look, this is about the best you're going to get. The neck on this thing is pretty minimal, as you expect from a lot of Zaku kits, so this is about as high as it can look up. You're going to rely a lot on torso articulation if you really wanted to kind of look and aim upward at something. In terms of a downward look, you will get extremely minor downward look, but the neck is on a hinge, so you can tilt the head forward to have it looking downwards a bit more convincingly. You will get pretty much no side-to-side tilt, extremely minor, and of course you will get a full 360 about the ball joint for the neck. Just be careful because the mouthpiece does scrape across the top of the chest parts here, and as you can see I did wear off the top coat a tiny bit. That was a bit of a mistake to do that, but of course on the shoulders then, you will get a incredibly nice shoulder swing out of the torso there. As you can see, the side parts on the torso here do articulate inward to aid in this extremely nice shoulder swing. You will also get a bit of a swing backwards. The shoulder armor can articulate a little bit independently of the arm, like so. Of course, on the left side, the shoulder shield is going to be on a ball joint that will do a bunch of ball joint things, as you would expect. The right spike shield can tilt upward like so to accommodate an upward raise of a little bit more than 90 degrees, so nothing too impressive. But the shoulder shield does move out of the way to enable that 90-degree raise in the first place. You will, of course, get full rotation in the upper bicep. A double bend in the elbow will give you an almost 180-degree bend before the fist will collide with the shoulder spikes. And, of course, the wrist is going to be on a ball joint. For the torso, then, for a forward ab crunch, you will get a decent ab crunch, considering the very large sections where the power piping connects into the bottom of the torso. For a backward crunch, you will get an okay upward look, but nothing too impressive, which is a little bit disappointing, especially combined with the lack of the neck that the Zaku 2 has. And of course, you will get a full 360 spin about the peg. In the backpack, then, the only articulation you're going to get are going to be the thrusters going to be on ball joints, which will do ball joint things. This has a similar problem to the Gundam FSD I took a look at, I think, last month, where the thrusters are going to be on polycap ball joints with a stick coming out of them, which means they are a little bit loose and do tend to fall out if you articulate them too much, so just be careful with that. For the skirts then, the front skirts do not come together on the runner. They are just on separate ball joints, which will go up a little bit more than 45 degrees, but nothing too crazy. The side skirts will, of course, tilt upwards a tiny amount, and it can swing forward and backwards and pivot and all that to get out of the way of the leg if necessary. And the back skirt is going to be fixed in place. For the legs then, there is a hip swing mechanism. If I get the front skirts out of the way, you can see both of the legs, there's a bit of a rail in there. Both of the legs can slide forward and back to get more natural poses out of it, so plenty of articulation there. For kicks then, for front kicks you will get just about 90 degrees at most. For side raises you will get just under 90 degrees before the leg will want to pop the side skirt out of the socket. And for back kicks you will get at most about 45 degrees before the leg will collide with the back skirt. You can't pivot it out to the side to get just under a 90-degree back kick, but at that point it's barely a back kick, it's more of a side kick. You will of course get full rotation in the upper thigh, a full double bend in the leg with a bit of an armor separation gimmick with this kneecap holding in place and exposing more of the inner frame to give about a 90-degree bend, a little bit more than that, before the very thick lower leg section will collide with the thigh. All of these thrusters on the lower leg unit are going to be fixed in place, and articulation there. In the feet then, the foot will get under a 45-degree pivot to either side. In terms of tilts then, you can get about 45 degrees to either side, quite nice. For a downward tilt, you will get a somewhat minor downward tilt and a very nice upward tilt. So overall, articulation is surprisingly good with the Zaku 2 HiMo. The only real disappointing parts, in my opinion, are going to be in the torso and head. You can't really get much vertical articulation out of it to have it aiming at targets that are either significantly above or below it, but we'll see that articulation in action in some poses. So getting the HiMo Zaku 2 into a bit of a spin, starting with the usual running and gunning pose, I'm actually pretty surprised at how nicely this handles this pose because of how far the ankle can fly forward and the large surface area in the feet. This kit really does look great in a running and gunning pose. It can handle it pretty naturally. You can throw the leg forward a little bit, bend the knee for a more extreme angle, and the Zaku machine gun does look fine being held in one hand, kind of firing off to the side like this. I know most people do like to use this machine gun kind of two-handed, kind of braced against the chest to give it more weight to make it look more powerful, but I think in this kind of pose it does look pretty good. The open hand does work fine as this kind of expressive hand flying backwards, but you can tell it was made primarily to act as a support hand for the anti-ship rifle. The Zaku 2 high mobility type, as you might expect, does look very good in motion, although it does look a hell of a lot better in the air, which you'll see in a lot of future poses, but in this pose on the ground, it's alright, especially if you manipulate the shoulders and stuff with the shoulder shield to make it look a little bit more dynamic and not just like tracing the arm. Unfortunately, though, the lack of a significant ab crunch, it's like okay but not great, really does limit the naturalness of how this feels, and the ability for it to be aiming upwards at a target. You kind of have to keep it level with the Zaku 2's shoulders. It's not really capable of any kind of super dynamic aiming upward, which is what I normally would like to do with a running and gunning pose. I think it just helps it look a bit more kinetic on the shelf. But this is definitely something I might consider doing on this shelf if this kit did not have more interesting options to pose it doing. So, of course, now getting the Zaku 2 HiMo into a crouching pose, firing the anti-ship rifle upward at a target. The anti-ship rifle does actually look really good in this kind of crouching pose. I kind of want to steal it and give it to another kit that would look a little bit better crouching on the ground, firing upwards at something, because, like I said earlier, the Zaku 2 HiMo name is there for a reason. It looks really good in motion, and on the ground like this, it's not the greatest. The bulked up legs and backpack really help it look better while it's grounded, but all the thrusters are antithetical to that and look pretty bad when this kit's just kind of sitting still and in place. If this were like just a normal Zaku 2, I would definitely consider doing this pose. It looks great, but for the high mobility type specifically, I feel like you're wasting a lot of its potential if you decide to pose it doing this. However, if this is something you want to do, it can pull off the crouching pose extremely easily. The very large surface area of the feet combined with the very thick kind of lower legs really helps this kit stay balanced on the ground. It also helps that there's nothing really crazy going on with the design apart from the handheld anti-ship rifle here. There's nothing really to super upset the balance of this kit, so there are no real balance issues. The one thing I did run into were the side skirts would pop off very easily. It was just something to keep in mind, and especially with the Heat Hawk being mounted on the side skirt like that, it kept wanting to fly off at a moment's notice. It would keep getting caught on things and it would keep wedging the side skirt off. So it's just something to keep in mind that the side skirts are pretty annoying, and I wish they had a different joint for it rather than just the polycap ball joint that it uses. It really does need to be a bit more secure into the waist because it pops off the moment the leg goes a little bit sideways, even close to 90 degrees. So it took a few tries to get this pose, but I think it would look good with a normal Zaku 2, not really with this one. So getting the Zaku 2 HiMo into the air now in my Action Base 7, here it is swinging the Heat Hawk. Now originally I was going to have the Zaku machine gun in the offhand and having the spare drum magazine for the machine gun kind of mounted onto the side skirts. Unfortunately that plan kind of went out the window because the magazine does not mount onto the skirt holes, even though the manual says it can. And whenever I tried to do it, it was just way too loose in there and kept falling out. So I don't know if it was an issue with my kit or if it's just like a common issue overall that the spare drum magazine just doesn't want to fit onto the skirts. But anyway, this kind of pose is fine. I do think it is a little weird that the hand's supposed to choke up so far onto the Heat Hawk. It does look a little bit odd. I'd rather if the hand stood a little bit lower on the handle. Unfortunately, the handle's too thin to accommodate that, and even the thicker part that the hand is supposed to hold on to is just a little bit too thin, so the axe would keep spinning around or sliding around and wasn't really held that securely in the hand. It took a while to get it even kind of balanced like this, and even then, It doesn't look the greatest. I've never been a huge fan of the Heat Hawk. It just seemed a little bit small and dinky to me, and really doesn't help express what this kit is capable of. Like, it is in motion, it is doing a melee pose, which is pretty dynamic, but I don't know, the Heat Hawk just feels pretty underwhelming in my opinion, and it's not really something I would consider posing this kit with, but of course, it's a Zaku, you kind of had to include it. It's just not the most interesting thing in the world. Speaking of interesting things, here's the Zaku 2 HiMo in the air firing the Zaku bazooka. It's flying forward, it's kind of aiming the Zaku bazooka off to the side, and of course, I've mounted the extra bazooka magazines onto the shoulder shield, and this pose looks pretty good. It does everything that I've said earlier that the Zaku 2 HiMo's good at. It's in the air, it looks dynamic, it's not using a dinky little weapon, it's using a big impressive weapon that really does help kind of draw out the motion of what this kit is doing, and it really does combine this sense of speed with a bit of heft, with the very thick extra lower legs, with all of the thrusters in them, with the extra bulky backpack, with the shoulder shield bulked up with the extra magazines. All of this looks great. The shoulder swing articulation for the left shoulder works really great to get the arm into position to grip the secondary handle of the Zaku bazooka. I can see a lot of other kits would struggle to pull it off with how the handle is positioned, but in general, this kit can pull off this pose extremely easily, and it looks great while doing so. This is definitely a weapon I would consider having this kit use on the shelf if it didn't come with the anti-ship rifle. If I do end up stealing the anti-ship rifle, giving it to another kit who wants to be crouching on the ground and firing it upwards, then yeah, I will definitely pose this kit with the Zaku bazooka. I think it looks great with it. So I'll leave this pose up for a bit while I talk about the conclusion. So in conclusion, the high-grade Crucruz Doan's Island Zaku 2 HiMo type is essentially just a recolor of 2015's Zaku 2 HiMo type, the Black Tri-Stars version from Gundam The Origin, just with a set of waterslide decals and a few changed details, like the inclusion of a commander antenna, of course it being in a bit of a muted version of Char's color scheme, and slightly different chest pieces to include the chest Vulcans that are on all of Char's Gundam The Origin Zaku kits. Apart from that, this is going to have essentially all of the pros and cons of 2015's Zaku 2 HiMo type. Now, I haven't built those kits, so everything I say here is going to apply kind of retroactively to them. So if you've built those kits, you already know what you're getting into if you decide to pick this one up. In terms of the build, it is surprisingly good. I was already impressed with the Gundam FSD, so I was expecting good things coming out of this kit because it's heavily based on the Gundam The Origin line, and I was not disappointed. There's a ton of parts layering, particularly in the torso. There is a bit of annoyance in terms of the power piping and remembering to kink them during the building process so it doesn't look super awkward and it fits nicely into the backpack. And apart from that, everything is fine and solid. There is some issues with the skirt armor with the polycaps, particularly in the side skirts. Those polycap balls really don't fit well into the hips and do tend to pop out super easily, but the build is stable enough, and as long as you don't swing the legs too far out to the sides, it can pull off most poses fine without falling apart. There is a bit of a fit issue with the drum magazine for the Zaku machine gun, where it doesn't really fit into the mounting holes on the skirts, but I don't know if that's a me issue or if it's an issue with the magazine. If you know, let me know in the comments. But the build is quite nice. Aesthetically, this is almost a perfectly color-accurate version of Char's HiMo Zaku 2. Really, the only major color-correcting detail that you need to paint in yourself that they don't include in the water slide sheet is going to be in the backpack for that pinkish dull red square that goes on the top right part of the high mobility backpack. Apart from that, everything else is covered in the water slide decals, but of course you can paint them in if you wanted to pop out a little bit more. The mono eye unfortunately doesn't come with any molded detail, so you would need to just paint a perfect circle exactly where the water slide would go on a flat surface, which was a little bit annoying, so we'd use the water slide for that. But to paint in the details on the scopes for the Zaku bazooka and anti-ship rifle is easy enough, and it does look really good, especially if you use like metallic pink to really help it pop. So nearly perfect representation of Char's Zaku 2 HiMo type, and of course the water slides do look great on it, although there are a few major seam lines that are a bit annoying in the front of the forearms, on the left shoulder with all the spikes, and on the sides of the lower legs where all of the like high mobility enhancements are. Those, once you fix them up, will really help this kit look its best. In terms of articulation then, it is mostly okay. The arms are honestly fantastic, a bit of an underwhelming side raise, but apart from that, it can pull off really anything you would want it to. The insane shoulder swing on it really does help this kit in all of its poses. The head articulation, it's a Zaku head, so I don't think anyone's really expecting it to have much verticality to it, but combined with a somewhat poor ab crunch means that this kit does struggle a bit to have any kind of verticality in its poses, so just keep that in mind when you're posing this kit. The leg articulation, it's a bit underwhelming with the kicks, but again, particularly to the side because of those side skirt fit fit issues I mentioned earlier with the polycap balls. They do tend to pop off very easily, but with a little bit of finicking, you can get this kit into a pretty nice aerial pose like the one you're seeing now with the shoulder charge holding the anti-ship rifle. The excellent shoulder articulation does mean this kit can comfortably two-hand as ranged options, which is something that a lot of kits do struggle with, to use the secondary handles of their ranged weapons or to have the kind of open hand act as a weapon support hand in any kind of convincing way. This kit does it near perfectly. The accessories are also excellent. This has pretty much everything you could ever want and more. The only thing it's really missing are kind of duplicate hand options for both sides, but that's a bit of a nitpick. It is a high grade. I don't think many people were expecting a full hand suite for everything, but this kit is nearly perfect on the accessory front. So would I recommend you buy this kit? For $30, it is a bit expensive for a high grade, but I think for what you get, it is pretty premium, especially including that very nice water slide sheet. So, especially if you don't have a Gundam The Origin Zaku 2 HiMo type, I would definitely recommend this kit, and I know it is kind of hard to find a lot of Gundam The Origin kits. There was a small reprint for some of those kits happening that were supposed to happen in May, I think for the Gun Tank early production type and the Dom test type. Apart from that, these kits do get reprinted pretty infrequently, so if this does get reprinted, if a second batch happens in like a couple months, I would definitely recommend you pick this up. It looks great, and especially if you don't have a Char's Zaku in 1/144th scale, this is a great representation of it in 1/144th scale. It is fantastic. It has so much detail, it has great articulation, it has perfect accessories. You only need to do a bit of minor painting to get it perfectly color accurate, and apart from the seam line cleanup, this is a relatively hassle-free kit that would look great in any collection. So that was my review of the high-grade Crucruz Doan's Island Char Zaku 2 High Mobility type. What a mouthful. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like reviews like these, make sure to sub and hit the notification bell. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the high-grade Police Zaku. I'll see you then.